Good evening, gentle soul. Let the world grow quiet now. 3 stories await you, calm, soft, and full of wonder. You're right where you need to be. At the very edge of a windless sea, where the tide murmured lullabies against the silver shore, there stood a lighthouse with a round glass crown and walls as pale as pearl. It was not a tall lighthouse, nor grand, nor much visited, except by gulls and drifting sea mist, but it had watched the waves longer than anyone remembered. The keeper of this lighthouse was an old man named Elyon. He walked slowly, as though time moved more gently around him. His coat smelled of salt and lavender. His eyes were quiet pools, like he'd seen many things and spoken a few. Every evening, he would climb the narrow stairs to the lantern room, light the great prism with a single match, and hum a little song under his breath that no one else knew. But this lighthouse did not simply guide ships. No ships had come this way in decades. The waters beyond had long been declared unnavigable, too thick with fog and time. Still, Elyon lit the lamp. For it was not ships that followed the light, but messages from the stars. They came on the wind sometimes, in curling ribbons of starlight that slipped through the open panes and whispered against the glass. Sometimes they came as glimmering motes of dust that hovered for a moment before vanishing. Sometimes, in dreams. Elyon would wake in the middle of the night, sit up in his small, round bed, and write words into a thick, leather-bound journal. The book was older than the dust in the corners, and filled with neat lines of silver ink, messages from faraway lights, captured in the hush between waking and sleep. They never said much. Just a phrase, or a sentence. The red moon dreams of mirrors. Wait 3 nights before opening the green envelope. She has not forgotten the stone you placed at the gate. Elyon never questioned. He simply wrote, then closed the book, and fell back asleep, as though the sea had rocked him in its cradle. On a night brushed with lavender mist, as soft as moth wings and warm with spring's first breath, a new message arrived. It came not as a whisper or a shimmer, but as a knock. Elyon heard it faintly through the hum of the turning light. It was rhythmic, like the slow tap of a spoon on the rim of a teacup. He stood, gently, bones creaking like old wood, and made his way down the spiral stairs. The door, painted seafoam blue, stood slightly ajar, though he always locked it. On the stone threshold sat a folded piece of parchment, the color of moon-bleached shells. No name. No seal. No wind to have blown it there. He carried it to his table, lit the small oil lamp, and unfolded the note. Only 6 words were written inside. He is coming. Watch the stars. No signature. No date. He read it again. Then once more. The letters shimmered slightly, as though wet with dew. Something about them felt familiar, yet wrong. Elyon placed the paper beside his journal, but did not write the message down. His hand hesitated over the silver pen. Instead, he stepped outside, barefoot onto the cold stone path that led down to the cliffs. The sea was unusually still. No breeze stirred the grass. Above, the stars blinked slowly, distant and half asleep. He stood for a long time, watching. But the stars said nothing. And far below, beneath the hush of the waves, something had begun to stir. The days passed like drifting kelp, slow, tangling, soft. 3 nights, just as the message had said. Elliot rose each evening before dusk, lit the lantern, recorded the temperature and tide, then sat in his creaking chair by the window with a mug of nettle tea and the quiet company of gulls. But the message stayed folded beside his journal, untouched, as though its ink might leak into the air if opened again. Each night, he watched the path that led down from the dunes. No visitor came. But on the 3rd night, just before midnight, the stars shimmered in a way they never had before. Not brighter, not faster, just differently. A few shifted positions, ever so slightly, as though making room for something unseen. And then, from the sea, came a sound, not of waves, nor wind, but of bells. Faint. Almost imagined. Elliot closed his journal. He stood, slow and deliberate, and walked out into the salt-kissed air. The shoreline was empty. He waited an hour. Then 2. Only the tide came in, licking the rocks with lazy foam. The bells faded. Yet in the morning, when he stepped out to gather driftwood, he found footprints. One set. Bare feet, small, light in the sand. They led from the shore to the door, then stopped. He looked at the closed door behind him. Listened. Silence. He did not find it strange. He had long since stopped expecting the world to explain itself. Still, when he opened the journal that evening, his hand did not reach for the silver pen. Instead, he whispered to the air, "Are you here?" No one answered. But somewhere, just beyond the corner of sound, something listened. Long ago, before the sea forgot its ships, Elliot had been young. The lighthouse had been new, too, with bright glass panes and paint unmarred by salt. He had taken over the post from his uncle, who had taught him 3 things: light the lamp no matter what, never turn your back on the sea, and some messages are not for reading. The lantern room still held a second light, a small, brass lantern with a cracked blue lens. It had never been used, not since the night his uncle left. It sat tucked in the corner like a sleeping memory. That night, Elliot found himself reaching for it. He lit it without thinking, then carried it to the shore. The blue light cast soft shadows on the sand, and the waves responded, curling inward, as though bending toward its glow. The footprints from the morning had vanished with the tide. But something new had appeared. There, nestled in a nook between the rocks, was a seashell. Not white, nor brown, but translucent, like it had been carved from starlight. Inside it were markings, not etched, but grown. Tiny spirals of silver threads, so fine they could barely be seen. A language not written, but woven. He held it up to his ear. No sound. But when he tucked it into his coat pocket, he felt a warmth not from the sun, and for a moment, he could not remember why he ever felt alone. The following evening, the wind forgot to rise. It was a quiet Elliot hadn't known before, not the ordinary hush of empty air, but a deep, full stillness, as though the world were drawing in a breath and holding it. Even the gulls had fallen silent, perched like statues along the cliffs. Inside the lantern room, the great light spun as usual, casting long ribbons of white across the dark water. But when Elliot glanced toward the west, he saw something strange, a thread of light on the horizon, faint and shimmering, pulsing like a heart. It didn't belong to the lighthouse. It came from somewhere beyond. He stood there long past midnight, watching it. It never moved closer. Never faded. Just pulsed. And when he turned to leave, a single feather lay on the stair behind him. Small. Gray. Tipped in gold. He picked it up with reverence, as though it were a letter folded by the sky itself. It felt warm in his hand. And somehow, impossibly, familiar. When he tucked it beside the starlit shell in his coat, a hush fell over the lighthouse. Not fear. Not worry. But a quiet shift, like a story beginning its middle. That night, he dreamed. In the dream, he was not old. Nor young. He stood between stars and sea, and the horizon bent toward him as if waiting for a name. Voices called his name, but not the one he used. Not Elliot. Something older. Something deeper. He awoke before dawn, heart slow but steady, and opened his journal to write at last. But before pen touched page, the silver ink was already there. He arrived. But not yet. The next morning brought clouds low and sleepy, draping the cliffs like scarves of fog. Elliot made tea with dried lemon peel and thyme, then sat in his armchair, the starlit shell and feather resting on the small table beside him. He hadn't spoken aloud in days. Yet the room did not feel empty. The brass clock ticked its slow rhythm. The sea murmured beyond the window, though the waves were smaller now, more thoughtful. When the knock came again, it was softer. 3 taps. Then silence. He opened the door. No one was there. But resting gently on the stone threshold was a folded square of dark velvet. Inside it, a compass. Or something like one. It had no needle. No directions. Just a single tiny light at its center, glowing steadily, like a firefly caught in amber. Around the edge, unfamiliar symbols shimmered, shifting with the angle of the light. A language not meant for speaking. Only following. Elliot held it for a long while before placing it beside the feather and shell. Together, the 3 objects formed a triangle. A quiet pattern. As though waiting for the 4th. He did not go out that night. He stayed by the fire, watching the blue lantern sway gently in the hallway like a soft pendulum. The lighthouse turned. The sea whispered. And somewhere, between the dark and the dawn, the stars began to speak again. But this time, they were not speaking to him alone. The 8th night began with mist. It rolled in early, not from the sea but from the dunes behind the lighthouse, thick, silver, and glowing from within. It carried no chill, no damp. Just a quiet brightness, like the breath of dreaming stars. Elliot stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, watching. From within the fog came a soft sound, footsteps, slow and deliberate. And then, Emerging as if shaped by the mist itself, a figure appeared. She was no more than a child, or perhaps something older, wearing the shape of one. Her hair fell like strands of night ink, and in her hand she held a single silver thread. It shimmered in the lantern glow, dancing like a ribbon in unseen wind. She did not speak. She only looked at Elyon with eyes like titipools, deep, still, and reflecting more sky than seemed possible. He stepped aside. She entered without question. She moved directly to the small table, where the triangle of objects lay, the shell, the feather, the compass, and placed her silver thread across them. It pulsed once with light. Then the girl turned, walked to the farthest window, and sat quietly as if waiting for something only she could hear. Elyon did not ask who she was. His questions had long grown roots and become trees. Instead, he placed another log on the fire, brewed a second cup of tea, and watched the mist curl slowly outside. In the stars above, a single constellation shifted shape, just slightly, like it had turned its head to listen. That night, the great lens atop the lighthouse turned more slowly than usual. The light it cast had changed, softer, blue-tinted, as though reflecting dreams rather than waves. Elyon stood in the lantern room, watching it move. The girl remained below, silent. She had not spoken since her arrival, and yet the air around her felt full, thick with presence, like a melody without sound. As the light circled, something unusual occurred. Instead of stretching endlessly across the sea, the beam bent. Not outward, but inward. It spiraled into the lighthouse itself, wrapping along the inner walls like a ribbon of luminous thought. It passed over Elyon, brushing his hands like starlight silk, then poured downward through the staircase, lighting every room. And in its glow, the lighthouse changed. The walls became translucent, like they had been built of pearl and memory. Images drifted across them, not reflections, but moments. A boy building a kite of driftwood. A storm watched from a high window. A pair of hands opening a letter, then quietly closing it again. These were not dreams. They were fragments of the lighthouse itself. It, too, had memories. The girl stood then. She placed her silver thread across the spinning beam, and it caught, gently, and twined itself into the light. The entire structure gave a soft, living sigh. Elyon did not speak. He only placed a hand on the warm glass of the lantern, and listened. And far below, beneath the sea's lullaby, the fourth object was beginning to rise. By the 10th night, the sea had gone mirror still. Not even a ripple touched the rocks. Elyon awoke just before dawn, not from sound, but from the absence of it. The kind of silence that arrives when something unseen is about to be revealed. He dressed slowly, as he always did, and lit the blue-lensed lantern. The girl was already outside. She stood barefoot in the pale sand, her thread held loosely in one hand, her gaze fixed on the tide pool nearest the lighthouse, one that had been dry for months, filled only with shadows and salt-crusted stone. Now, it shimmered like glass. Elyon joined her without a word. In the heart of the pool, something pulsed with light beneath the surface. Not a reflection. Not the moon. but something real, glowing and slow as breath. It rose as they watched. A stone. But not made of earth. It was shaped like a teardrop, clear as quartz, and inside swirled a miniature sky, clouds that moved, stars that flickered, a dawn perpetually beginning. The girl reached out, lifted it with both hands, and placed it in the center of the table within the lighthouse. Now the triangle was complete. The fourth piece, time itself, perhaps, rested at their center. Shell. Feather. Compass. Sky stone. A circle drawn with meaning. Elyon sat beside it and understood, not with words but with stillness. The lighthouse had never been only for guiding ships. It had been a memory. A beacon. A gate. And tonight, the gate would open. The wind returned just before midnight. It came not from the west, where the sea stretched out endlessly, but from below. A breath rising from the ocean's depths, warm and fragrant, like cedar wood and distant rain. The light from the great lens no longer turned, it had stilled, forming a single glowing column that pointed straight upward into the stars. The girl stood again, silver thread in hand, and stepped into the center of the light. It wrapped around her like silk. She turned once toward Elyon, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it carried oceans within it. She raised the shell to her ear. The feather to the wind. The compass to the stars. And then, she placed the sky stone at her feet. The ground beneath them shimmered. Not shook, not rumbled or split, but shimmered, like a reflection disturbed by thought. Then came the sound, the soft ringing of distant bells, the same Elyon had heard many nights before. But now they were near. Clear. Calling. The sea peeled back, revealing a pathway of glassy water and moonlit stone, winding far beneath the waves, curving toward the unknown. The girl stepped onto the path. Elyon did not follow. This was not his journey. He watched as her form grew smaller, swallowed slowly by water and starlight. And when she vanished from view, the sea closed behind her without a sound. After the sea folded gently back into place, all things were quiet for a long time. Not empty. Not hollow. But full in a way that only silence can be, like a room left warm after its guest has gone. The blue-lensed lantern had gone dim. The great light no longer spun. The lighthouse itself had softened, its stone glowing faintly from within, as though lit by breath instead of flame. Elyon walked its rooms as he always had, but they felt different now. Larger, perhaps. Or maybe simply lighter. The corners that had once held cobwebs now seemed filled with misty light. The stair creaked more softly, like it remembered feet other than his. Each evening, he still climbed to the top and looked out. But not to send messages. Now, he listened. The stars no longer whispered words. But they pulsed gently, like quiet hearts in the sky. And sometimes, in the way the clouds curved or the tide moved or the light landed on the page of his journal, he felt the shape of her, the girl with the thread, still moving far below. He no longer wrote messages. Instead, he sketched. Images from dreams, or from memory, a path of silver stone, a compass with no needle, a smile that echoed for days. The lighthouse no longer waited. It remembered. And memory, Elyon now knew, was its own kind of light. On the 12th night since the sea had opened, the stars arranged themselves into a shape Elyon had never seen before. It was a circle, with 4 smaller stars inside, each one pulsing at its own rhythm. Shell. Feather. Compass. Stone. He smiled without knowing why. That night, he made one final cup of tea and sat beside the fire. The journal lay open beside him, its last page still blank. He picked up the silver pen, and did not write. He let it rest across the page, a symbol more than a sentence. Outside, the waves rolled in and out, like the breath of a sleeping world. And then, the lighthouse dimmed. Not gone. Not dark. Just quiet. Like a candle waiting for a match. Like a song holding its final note. Elyon closed his eyes, the warmth of the fire and the hush of the sea folding around him like a blanket. And in the deep below, where no map ever reached, a single light moved along a silver path, slowly, gently, steadily onward. The lighthouse stood, as it always had. But now, it watched the stars not for ships, but for dreams. And somewhere, just past the last ripple of sound, a bell rang, once, twice, 3 times, then faded into the soft hush of forever. On a hill that remembers everything, a quiet collector listens for pebbles that hum. But one day, a pebble arrives, that says nothing at all. There was a hill, neither tall nor wide, but rounded like a sleeping thought, cradled by soft valleys and the edge of a slow village. It was called Quiet Hill, not because it was silent, but because it had learned to listen. The wind passed gently over it, carrying no rush, the birds sang as if they whispered to the soil, and the grasses bowed not in fear, but in reverence. The people of the village knew to walk softly when near it. They said the hill could hear things the sky forgot. If someone was sad, and they stood barefoot on its mossy slope, they often left lighter. If someone told it a secret, it would keep it tucked beneath a stone, humming it gently back into the earth. At the crest of the hill stood a small round cottage, snug and moss-laced, with windows made of sea glass and a chimney that leaned slightly to the right, as if it too were listening. In this cottage lived Pim, a quiet figure with a voice soft as loam and a heart tuned to the hum beneath things. Pim was the collector, not of herbs or honey, nor of feathers or rain, but of pebbles that hummed. Each morning, Pim would step into the day as if stepping into a song. A worn satchel over one shoulder, a clay mug of nettle tea in hand, bare feet pressing into dew-wet grass. The search was never rushed. Pim would move slowly through the hush of chamomile and clover, hands out, fingers brushing stems. It wasn't sight that guided the way. It was the feeling, an invisible thread that tugged gently from somewhere beneath the soil. When Pim found the right place, the knees would lower, hands would settle, and the earth would be touched with care. And if a pebble was ready, it would hum, not in the ears, but somewhere inside the chest. A soft tremor, like the memory of a lullaby. Pim would dig slowly, wrap the stone in velvet, no labels, no markings, and carry it home. Each stone held a story. Not a full one. Just a moment, a whisper, a thought. Joy that had nowhere to go. Grief softened by time. Wishes made on stars that had already fallen. Some pebbles would sing after a day. Others waited years. But the hill knew. And Pim listened. It was during one of these ordinary mornings, in the soft bloom of spring, that something changed. The sun had not quite climbed the sky. The clouds were still pale and uncommitted, and the hill was wrapped in its usual shawl of mist. Pim followed the familiar ritual, tea, satchel, deep breath, and wandered out with the same quiet reverence. Near the old lavender stump, a pebble called. A strong hum, a kind warmth. It was shaped like a tear and wrapped in gold velvet, placed in the satchel with care. By midday, Pim had gathered 3 more, each with a different feeling, a quiet chuckle, a faded dream, a note of longing. All was as it had always been. But then, on the way back home, Pim felt a weight in the satchel that hadn't been there moments before. Not heavier in size, just in feeling. A strange weight that didn't pull down, but inward. Pim opened the flap. Inside was a stone. Smooth, oval, pale as milk glass. Pim froze. It hadn't been gathered. There had been no hum, no warmth. No moment of connection. Just this. Pim lifted it in both hands. Turned it over. No sound. No tremble. No feeling at all. And yet, it refused to be unseen. It stared, not with eyes, but with stillness. A kind of presence so quiet, it was louder than words. It made the other pebbles seem distant. Duller. Pim did not wrap it. Could not. Velvet didn't feel right. The pebble was carried home in both hands and placed on the center of the round table. And as evening settled in, the cottage grew strangely still. Not the peaceful stillness of a hill listening, but a silence that watched. That night, Pim didn't sleep. Not truly. There were no dreams, no restless thoughts. Just stillness. A wide, cool silence that filled the round cottage like a mist. Even the kettle forgot to whistle. The fire crackled only once before falling into a hush, as if uncertain whether it should disturb the room. The strange pebble sat exactly where Pim had left it, on the center table, unwrapped, unspoken to, and unblinking in its presence. It hadn't moved, but its stillness had spread. The pebbles on the hearth shelf seemed quieter. The floorboards didn't creak. The wind, which usually sighed through the eaves, passed over the cottage as if tiptoeing by. In the early morning hours, just before the first color touched the sky, Pim lit a beeswax candle and sat before the stone. No words. Just watching. Then, with cautious fingers, Pim reached out and touched it. Cold. But not lifeless. No. There was something there. Not a hum, not a story, more like the outline where a story should have been. A hollow shape. The echo of a memory forgotten too long ago. Pim tried to listen, as with any other pebble. Both palms rested flat on the table, close but not touching the stone. Breath held. Heart slow. Nothing. And yet, the air felt full. When Pim finally stood to open the window, the first bird song of the day rose into the air, and stopped midway through the trill. A robin paused on the sill, tilted its head toward the pebble, and flew away in silence. Later, when Pim walked the hill with bare feet and open hands, the ground felt strange. The familiar warmth beneath the soil was gone. The hill, once full of whispers, now held its breath. It was as though the arrival of the silent stone had hushed the earth itself. As though the hill, too, had begun to listen back. That night, Pim did dream. But it was not like the usual dreams, those soft, half-shaped images that came from the hill's hums. No. This dream had weight. It moved slowly, without voice, and pressed down like mist before a storm. In the dream, Pim stood in the center of the hill. The grasses were flat, brushed in one direction by some great wind long past. The sun was absent. Not hidden, absent. The sky held a light that had no warmth, no direction. At Pim's feet lay the strange pebble, now glowing faintly, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a heartbeat trying to remember its purpose. Then, from the center of the hill, the soil began to shift. Not with violence. Just quietly, deliberately. A circle appeared in the grass, a spiral slowly turning inward, carved by no tool, forming a path that hadn't been there before. Pim followed. Step by step, the dream path led down into the earth, not a tunnel, not stairs, but a slope that curled like a memory descending into itself. At the bottom stood a hollow made of stone, smooth and perfect, like it had waited for years untouched. And in its center, a second pebble. Identical in shape. Silent. Waiting. When Pim reached out to touch it, the dream fell away. Pim awoke at once, sitting upright in bed, the candle still burning low. The original pebble still sat on the table. But now, it was warm. And the velvet bag that held the day's other stones lay overturned, its contents spilled. Each of the wrapped pebbles was humming softly, anxiously, uncertainly, as if whispering questions into the air. The hill had begun to remember something it did not understand. And Pim, who had always listened, now had no answers to give. For days after the dream, Pim walked the hill without finding a single pebble. No hums rose through the grass. No warm spots in the soil. Even the spots that had always sung, the curve near the elder tree, the hollow behind the fern mound, were silent. The hill had closed its eyes. Not in anger. Not in grief. But in concentration, as if listening to something far away, or deep within. Each morning, Pim knelt with open palms, whispering the gentle greeting always used before searching. "I am listening," Pim said, voice low and steady. But the earth gave no reply. The only stone that still pulsed with any presence at all was the silent one. It remained on the table, never moving, never glowing again, but never quite still. It didn't hum, but something inside it shifted, like a sound not yet spoken, a breath drawn but not released. One morning, just before sunrise, Pim brought the stone to the center of the hill. The grasses were still. The wind slept. Pim knelt, placed the stone gently upon the moss, and waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then, without sound, the ground beneath the pebble gave the smallest tremble, no quake, no shift, only a breath. A pulse. Pim placed a hand beside it and felt the same rhythm from the dream. One beat, pause. Another, pause. The pebble was remembering. Or perhaps the hill was, through it. When Pim brought it back to the cottage, something unexpected had changed. The wrapped pebbles, hundreds of them, some resting for years, had unwrapped themselves. All across the shelves, pieces of velvet lay curled like petals, and the stone sat bare, humming not with stories, but with questions. They buzzed faintly, like bees trapped inside glass. None of them made sense. And the hill still refused to speak. On the seventh day, Pim returned to the spiral path from the dream, not in sleep, but in waking. It was midday, and the light had a strange silverness to it, as if borrowed from the moon. Pim walked without satchel, without tools. Only the silent stone, cradled in both hands, and the memory of the dream path as guide. Near the base of the old sycamore, the grass changed. It leaned inward, gently, forming a slow swirl that was almost, but not quite, a spiral. Pim stepped carefully into its center. At once, the wind stopped. The clouds overhead stilled, like breath held at the edge of a sentence. Then, quietly, the ground gave way. Not dramatically. Just a gentle sinking, as if the soil sighed beneath Pim's feet. And there, beneath the top layer of earth, Pim uncovered a shallow basin, lined with smooth stones arranged in a perfect ring. In the center, a space that had clearly once held something. A shape worn into the moss. The memory of a presence. But it was empty. Pim placed the silent stone into the hollow. It fit. Perfectly. As if it had once belonged there, long before it had been forgotten. Long before anyone had ever come to listen. And as Pim touched the stone one last time, something stirred, not in the ground, but in the air. A warmth. A soundless note. The stone was not new. It was returned. And now, slowly, carefully, it began to open, not like a flower, but like a thought remembering itself. That night, the dream returned. But it came differently than before. It did not rise from sleep like a story waiting to be told. It slid in quietly, like mist beneath a door, and Pim was already dreaming before realizing it. This time, Pim stood not atop the hill, but beneath it. There were roots above, long and white as old bones, curving gently through a ceiling of soil that pulsed with pale light. It was not a cave, but something deeper. A place of waiting. A place of memory. All around, the air shimmered with warmth, though no fire glowed. And in the center of the space, on a stone pedestal carved with looping, leaf-like patterns, rested the silent pebble. But it was no longer silent. It sang, not with sound, but with color. Swirls of gold and violet poured from it like slow smoke. The pedestal trembled with it. The roots leaned in, listening. Even the earth above gave off a soft, glowing breath. And within the light, Pim saw scenes. A girl kneeling on the hilltop long, long ago, before the village was built. She wore robes much like Pim's, her hands cupped around a small stone. Around her, the grasses swayed in time with a tune that no longer had a name. The girl pressed the stone into the earth, whispering words Pim couldn't hear. Then she smiled, stood, and vanished into mist. Pim stepped forward in the dream, drawn by the warmth, and reached toward the stone. The moment fingers touched it, the colors dimmed. The light folded in on itself. The root hollow faded. And Pim awoke. But not in bed. Pim was standing barefoot on the hill, just before dawn, hands cupped around the real stone, still warm. And the grasses around Pim were swaying. There was no wind. Pim stayed still a long while. The dawn light stretched in soft golds, wrapping the hill like a shawl. Dew glittered on the grass, and a single lark sang a tremulous note before falling quiet again, as if surprised to hear its own voice. The pebble no longer pulsed. It rested, quiet once more, but no longer unreadable. Now, Pim could feel something inside it, not a hum, not a word, but a shape. A story that had lost its voice long ago, and now waited for someone to lend it breath. Pim walked home slowly, pebble in hand, thoughts as quiet as the morning. Back at the cottage, the other pebbles had changed again. They no longer hummed with questions. Instead, they glowed faintly, like tiny lanterns. Not bright, never harsh, but steady. As if relieved. One by one, Pim touched each of them. Each pebble whispered a small memory, not of itself, but of the silent stone. Of a time before they were gathered. Of a presence that had once kept the hill steady and the earth's dreams balanced. This stone had been their keeper. And somehow, it had been forgotten. Buried too deep. Left too long. Pim set the stone back on the table and lit a small flame beside it. A candle made of beeswax and thyme, used only for listening. The flame flickered once. Then twice. Then held steady. Outside, the sky turned silver with cloud. And beneath the soil, just beneath the roots, something ancient shifted, like a door long shut loosening quietly at its hinges. The hill was different now. Not louder, not changed in any way that could be seen by eyes alone, but different in feeling. When Pim stepped onto the mossy path that circled the crest, the ground no longer held back. It welcomed. It breathed. And beneath the surface, faint and slow, the hum had returned. But it was not the same hum Pim had always followed. This one was lower, deeper, older. It didn't rise to meet the hand, it pulled gently, like an unseen current. Pim followed. Barefoot, empty-handed, wrapped in the silence of morning, Pim moved across the slope until the pull grew stronger near a weathered stone ring, half swallowed by grass. Many had passed it before, thinking it only a marker, an old gathering place, or the rim of a forgotten well. But it had once been a circle of memory, a place where the very first pebble had been given its voice. In the center, Pim knelt, pressed a palm to the cool, moist earth, and listened. This time, the hill answered. Not with words, but with presence. A warmth filled Pim's hand, then the wrist, then the heart, a rush of knowing, not quite thought, not quite image. A remembering of the girl in the dream, of the stone before it lost its hum, of a time when memory was not gathered and carried, but shared. The silent pebble was the first. The one the hill had formed not from sorrow or joy, but from its own need to remember, its own wish to feel. And long ago, it had chosen a keeper. That girl, with moss-green eyes and bare feet. The same girl Pim had seen in the dream. The same one who had vanished into mist. Now, the hill asked Pim, quietly, without pressure, will you become the next? Pim did not answer aloud. But a soft breath left their lips, and the soil beneath the stone circle sighed in response. The choice had been made. That evening, Pim returned home with slow steps, the silence of the hill now stitched into their bones. The silent pebble no longer needed the table. Pim placed it in a small niche above the hearth, an alcove once kept empty, waiting without knowing why. There it glowed gently, not with light, but with remembrance. And as the last sliver of dusk slipped into shadow, something strange and lovely occurred. One by one, the pebbles around the room began to hum. Each with its own note. Soft. Gentle. Never rising above a whisper. But together, they formed a kind of music. A chorus of memories, joy, sorrow, wonder, loss, laughter, waiting, returning, all blending into a lullaby for the hill itself. Pim sat in the center of the room, arms resting on their knees, eyes half closed. The notes passed through skin and soul alike. This wasn't noise. It was home. The candle still burned beside the keeper's stone. Its flame, too, began to flicker in rhythm with the song. And outside the round house, dew gathered in silver threads on every blade of grass. The wind stirred once, not to move, but to listen. Even the moon, drifting quietly above, seemed to pause. The hill, the pebbles, and Pim, all together now, remembered. And for the first time in many seasons, the earth sang back. The morning after the song, the world was quieter than usual, but not in the same way it had been when the stone first arrived. Now, the quiet held warmth. It was a stillness that felt like moss underfoot, like the hush that follows a story well told. Pim awoke before the sun, not from habit, but because the hill itself had stirred gently, as if whispering, "Come now, listen." Pim wrapped their shawl, stepped outside barefoot, and breathed. The grasses were silver-tipped with dew, bending not from weight, but from peace. The clouds above were soft, like scattered thoughts that had no urgency. The breeze was shy, curling around Pim's ankles like a cat. And the hill hummed. Not just beneath the soil now, but through everything. It was in the sky, the mist, the birdsong just beginning to rise. The hum had found its way back into the world. And for the first time in days, perhaps longer, Pim did not feel the need to search. There was no satchel packed. No tools gathered. No stones lifted from the earth. There was no call. Because the story was complete. Not ended. Just at rest. Later, back inside, Pim prepared tea and placed a second cup beside the candle, though no one had come. The silent pebble, resting in its alcove, no longer pulsed. It simply glowed. A keeper's stone. Returned, remembered, and now, quiet. Pim looked around at the pebbles once collected, once carried. They had stopped humming. They had been heard. And there was nothing more they asked. The seasons turned, as they always do. Spring softened into summer. The grass grew long, wildflowers taller, and clouds stretched lazily across a sky in no hurry to change. Bees came and went. Birds nested and sang. And Pim stayed. Still barefoot. Still listening. But the work had changed. No longer a collector, Pim became something else. A keeper. Not just of pebbles, but of place. Of the silence that had shape. Of the songs that didn't need names. Pim no longer searched for the hill's voice, because it now lived in every step taken across its back. And the hill. It no longer held its breath. It spoke freely, through breeze, through moss, through the soft way it held Pim's cottage in its gentle rise. Pebbles still appeared now and then, small and humming, but they were not gathered. Pim would touch them, smile, and leave them where they lay. Their stories belonged to the soil now. Sometimes, travelers came. They didn't stay long. They would pause near the hilltop, often quieting without knowing why, and walk a little slower through the tall grass. Pim would nod from the garden, offer tea, and say very little. But when they left, they always felt lighter. They never quite remembered why. And so the hill remained, as it always had. A quiet place. A listening place. A place where forgotten things were kept not in stone, but in the spaces between them. And in the round house of colored glass and moss roof, a candle burned in the window, small, steady, and soft as a heartbeat. For some stories don't end. They simply settle. Beneath a silver lake lies a hidden world. It cannot be found, only invited. And one evening, a painter sees the first ripple. Far beyond the rolling fields and quiet valleys, there was a lake so calm it was said to have never rippled in anger. Its waters were silver, not from moonlight, but from something deeper, an echo that lived beneath the surface. The lake was called Caliph, and though maps marked it plainly, no traveler ever arrived without feeling they'd stumbled into a dream. Nothing ever hurried there. The lilies bloomed year-round, their star-shaped petals opening only at twilight. The air smelled of moss and faint sweetness, and even the frogs croaked in lullabies. At the edge of the lake lived a painter named Oral, who had once wandered far and wide but had, many years ago, chosen stillness. He made a home in a crooked cottage with windows shaped like water drops and a roof tiled with painted slate. Each day he sat at the water's edge, brush in hand, waiting. Not for inspiration, but for the invitation. For it was said, only in hushes, only by those who stayed long enough to listen, that beneath Lake Caliph there lay a kingdom, not made of coral or sand, but of memory and light. It floated just below the world and appeared only to those who were ready to see what was hidden in stillness. Aurel had once glimpsed it in the wake of a dragonfly. Just for a moment. A tower made of glass. A bridge of lilies. A lantern swinging from mist. He had not chased it. He had waited. And on the first night of the lavender moon, when the lilies opened in spirals and the mist rose straight upward like breath, the lake sent him a sign. A ripple. Just one. It broke the surface with perfect intent, at his feet, curling outward in a slow spiral. Aurel set down his brush. The invitation had arrived. The next morning, Aurel returned to the lakeside before the sun had risen, carrying nothing but a lantern, a small satchel, and the quiet of someone who had already stepped partway into a dream. The ripple had vanished, but the air felt different, more awake. The lilies turned their pale faces toward him. Dragonflies passed in slow arcs, their wings catching colors not found in sunlight. Aurel sat cross-legged by the water and waited. And then, the light changed. It was not dawn. It was not moonlight. It came from beneath. The surface of the lake gleamed suddenly, as if something inside had been stirred from slumber. A trail appeared, not a bridge, not a boat, but a path, formed of floating mirrors that barely touched the water. Each one reflected not the sky, but something older, places Aurel had dreamed of as a child, colors he had used before they had names. Without hesitation, he stood. The moment his foot touched the first mirror, the air hushed. Even the birds stopped singing. The mirrors did not shift or sink. They held him as gently as memory holds a name. Step by step, he walked. The path curved gently across the lake, far from the shore, farther than he had ever seen another soul wander. Beneath the glassy steps, shapes moved, soft towers, glimmers of light that blinked like sleeping eyes, gardens where fish swam through rows of translucent blooms. The kingdom was rising to meet him. And Aurel, without fear, stepped into the heart of the reflection. As Aurel stepped farther across the mirrored path, the air thickened, not with heaviness, but with meaning. Each breath felt fuller, as though he was not inhaling air, but memory itself. The lake no longer reflected the sky above, but a new world rising from below, shifting towers, drifting bridges, luminous gardens shaped like dreams long forgotten. When he reached the last mirror, it tilted, just slightly, and instead of stepping forward, he stepped down. But he did not fall. The water welcomed him without sound or splash, parting around his form like mist. His clothes did not soak. His breath did not vanish. It was as though he had stepped not into water, but into another silence. Below him, the kingdom opened like a sleeping eye. Soft structures of light and glass wavered in the gentle current. Archways curved like seashells. Lanterns floated in slow circles, casting glows that flickered between memory and dream. Everything moved with the grace of a lullaby. And there, drifting toward him, came the first inhabitant. It was not a person, not exactly. More a shape, gentle and slow, made of woven light and softened water. Where a face might have been, there was a shimmer, like a smile remembered from childhood. It bowed once, then turned, inviting him to follow. Oral did. He walked along coral-white stone that never quite touched the lake bed. Schools of glimmering fish passed like brushstrokes. Beneath his feet, the world pulsed with color, faint blues, soft greens, lavender tones that changed with his thoughts. He did not speak. The kingdom did not need words. It was listening to him already. The gentle guide led Oral to a great domed hall, where the water grew brighter and warmer. Inside were no books, no scrolls, no voices. Instead, the chamber was filled with floating threads, thousands of them, trailing like seaweed, each one glowing faintly in a color not found on land. They drifted up from the floor and vanished into the roof, as though reaching for stars far beyond the surface. Oral paused beneath the tallest thread, and at once, it lowered toward him. When he reached out, it curled softly around his wrist. He felt a moment pass through his skin, sharp, clear, and gentle. It was his. A memory. But not one he had remembered before. A childhood evening, chasing a moth with golden wings, laughter echoing from a garden that never truly existed. Yet it was his. Or something close enough to feel like home. Each thread in the archive was a memory, some lost, some borrowed, some never fully lived. They did not belong to any one person. They belonged to the dreaming. To the kingdom beneath the lake. Oral wandered through them slowly, touching one, then another. A story of a forgotten name. A goodbye never spoken. A joy too soft to hold. None of them were heavy. They moved through him like song. And when he turned back to ask the guide what this place truly was, the figure was gone. But in its place, a lily bloomed from the floor, its petals of glass, its stem swaying gently in the weightless water. At its center was a seed. Still, dark, and waiting. The seed in the lily's center was small and dark, matte against the glowing petals, unassuming, quiet. And yet, as Oral reached for it, he felt a strange stillness press into his chest. Not a warning, not fear, something closer to a held breath. He cupped the seed in his palm, and it was cool, pulsing with a faint rhythm. From somewhere nearby, the floor of the hall shifted. A smooth pathway appeared, curving into the depths of the kingdom. Without knowing why, Oral followed. The seed guided him now, warm in his hand, not with light but with direction. The corridor opened into a vast, slow-breathing space, the garden of unspoken things. There were no trees, no soil, only spiraling beds of drifting flowers, each tethered to invisible roots. Some were luminous and tall, others small and coiled tight. They moved gently, as though dreaming. No voices. But Oral felt the weight of presence. He knelt at the edge of an empty spiral, a space that pulsed faintly, welcoming. The seed in his palm stirred. As he lowered it into the center, it left his hand without resistance, sinking slowly, softly. At once, the garden responded. The spiral around the seed lit up, one blossom at a time. A pattern formed, not random, but familiar. Aurel recognized colors from his earliest paintings. Shapes that had visited him in sleep. Emotions he'd tried to express but could never name. The seed had grown not from memory, but from what had always been waiting inside him. A dream too quiet to rise on its own. And now, it would be part of the kingdom. Not to keep, but to share. After planting the seed, Aurel stood in stillness for a long time, watching the spiral bloom, not with flowers, but with forms, small pieces of something becoming. Each curve shimmered with feeling, not meaning. The kingdom had taken the shape of what he had once carried, and offered it back to him, mirrored and magnified. Then, from above, the water shifted. Dozens of lanterns began to descend, each one pale, glowing, shaped like teardrops. They floated slowly, as if in procession, gathering in the center of the garden. From the curved wall, a gentle current pulled them into a single spiral, echoing the one below. Aurel watched as the lanterns turned toward him, not physically, but intentionally, as though awaiting a choice. One drifted forward. It pulsed faintly. Inside it was a flicker, an image. Aurel saw himself, years ago, sitting in the garden of his first home, painting the reflection of a sky that had never truly existed. That painting had never sold. He'd never shown it. It had lived in a drawer, folded, forgotten. And yet, here it was, preserved. Remembered. Offered back. The lantern did not ask. It only waited. Gently, Aurel reached out. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the lantern dimmed, folding inward. And with it, a path appeared, a spiral of light, curling upward toward the surface. He was being invited to return. Not because the kingdom was done with him, but because it had given him something precious, a story not yet finished. One he had to carry back to the waking world. The spiral of light shimmered gently before Aurel, leading upward through the warm hush of the kingdom. It was not made of stairs, nor of steps, but of drifting glimmers, tiny points of light that pulsed with invitation. They did not pull, they did not urge. They simply existed, waiting for him to take the first movement. Aurel lingered at the edge, eyes drifting back toward the garden. The seed he had planted still glowed, its spiral slowly expanding, now sprouting delicate forms that danced with the rhythm of unseen tides. His dream, the one he had never spoken aloud, was now rooted in the soil of the kingdom. And it would remain there, growing in stillness. He had not spoken to any creature. Had not asked a single question. Yet he understood something now, this place did not need language. It needed presence. One had to bring all of themselves, past, future, forgotten, and offer it in stillness. He turned, stepped into the spiral. As his foot met the first glimmer, it held him gently. Then another. Then another. Each point of light remembered him. And as he rose through the spiral, the shapes of the kingdom fell into soft blur, like watercolors beneath glass, softening with distance but never fading. Halfway to the surface, Aurel paused. A voice, not heard, but felt, brushed against his thoughts. It did not speak words. But Aurel understood it clearly. What you carry will remember you. What you forget will still return. He closed his eyes and continued upward. Aurel emerged from the lake without a sound. No splash. No gasping breath. Just a quiet parting of water, like a page turned in a long-forgotten book. He stood again on the shore of Caliph, lantern in hand, though he could not remember having brought it back. The sky was pale lavender. The lilies were still. Dragonflies hovered in slow loops, their wings stirring the hush without breaking it. Everything looked the same. And yet, Aurel knew that nothing was the same. He walked slowly back to his cottage. It welcomed him like a friend who had waited without asking why. Inside, his brushes were where he had left them. The canvases, half-finished, still leaned against the walls. Tea leaves floated in a cold cup by the window. He sat. No need to speak. He lit a candle. No need to explain. The lantern, still glowing, was placed gently beside the smallest canvas. Its light flickered once, then held steady. When Aurel touched his brush again, his hand moved without planning. Shapes formed, soft towers, spiraling blooms, glass lilies. But they were not copies of the kingdom. They were echoes. He painted not what he had seen, but what had followed him back. And the lake, outside the window, mirrored it all, reflecting not just the world, but the dream within it. Word, as it often does in quiet places, spread slowly, but surely. It wasn't loud, nor curious. It wasn't even truly spoken. Yet in the weeks that followed Aurel's return, travelers began to arrive. Not many. Just one, then another, then a third a few days later. They came with no maps and gave no names. Some were painters. Others wandered with sketchbooks, notepads, flutes, or nothing at all. A few brought only silence, which they offered freely. They came because they had dreamed of glass lilies, or lanterns that floated through stillness, or voices that were not voices at all. They came because something inside them was unfinished, not broken, just waiting to be remembered. And Aurel, now quieter than ever, never asked their reason. He simply offered tea, warm bread, and a lantern for their windows. Each night, as dusk curled around the lake like a cat, they would walk to the shoreline and sit. No one entered the lake. No one tried. But they listened. And sometimes, when the water was especially calm and the lilies turned their pale faces toward the moon, a single ripple would bloom near the center. Slow, spiraled. And the visitors would close their eyes, and something inside them would shift, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could see. But they always left lighter. And they always left something behind. A drawing. A song. A word in a language never spoken. Or nothing at all, save the silence of understanding. The kingdom had not closed. It had simply changed where it lived. Years passed. Oral aged like driftwood, weathered, smoothed, softened, never broken. His hair turned the color of soft ash, his hands slower, his steps gentler still. But the lake never changed. The lilies bloomed. The dragonflies danced. And beneath the surface, the spiral of mirrors remained, unseen, untouched, but always present. Oral no longer painted for others. He painted to remember. But what he painted was never quite the same image twice. One canvas held a door made of feathers. Another, a tower built of sleep. One showed a pebble falling through the sky into a still pool, its ripples forming a music no ear could catch. They were not landscapes. Not dreams. They were reflections. And then one evening, as the lavender moon returned and the lake shimmered silver with waiting, Oral lit a lantern and walked once more to the water's edge. He sat, as he always had. He did not call. He did not seek. He simply waited. And when the ripple came again, just one, he smiled. He did not stand. He did not enter. He closed his eyes, and listened. Somewhere beneath the hush, the kingdom stirred, not as a place, but as a breath, a memory, a seed planted in stillness. And the lake, with its glass-like calm, did what it had always done. It kept the reflection. Not of what was lost, but of what had always been quietly found.